She was there, on the other side of the table, waiting. You could feel the weight of the silence. Every second felt like an eternity. You knew you needed to say something, but what? In that moment, without you realizing it, an invisible judgment was already taking place. Not about your words that had not yet been spoken. Not about your intentions. But about something much deeper, your position in a game you didn't even know you were playing. The brutal truth is this: in the first minutes of any interaction between a man and a woman, a psychological framework is established. A frame. And that frame determines everything that comes afterward. It's not about physical attraction. It's not about charm. It's about hierarchy of value. And you, most likely, are losing this game before you even start talking. Because here's what no one tells you: while you're trying to impress, while you're thinking about what to say, while you're seeking approval in her eyes, she has already categorized you. High value. Medium value. Low value. And that decision happens in fractions of a second, based not on what you say, but on how you position yourself mentally. Think about the last time you felt the need to explain yourself to someone. Remember that feeling of justifying yourself? Of trying to prove your value? That is the exact moment you lose. Because every word that comes out of your mouth with the intention of convincing communicates only one thing: insecurity. And insecurity is read as low value. Always. What happens in her mind is not rational. It's not a list of pros and cons. It's an ancient psychological algorithm, developed over millions of years of evolution. She is not consciously thinking, "This man has low value." But her nervous system is reading every micro-expression, every hesitation, every word loaded with a need for validation. And here is the paradox that destroys most men: the more you try to climb the value hierarchy through words and actions, the more you descend. Because the attempt itself communicates need. And need is the exact opposite of value. Have you ever seen those men who seem to have everything under control? Who don't need to explain themselves? Who speak little, but every word carries weight? They're not doing anything special. They simply are not playing the game you're playing. They are not trying to be chosen. They are choosing. And that difference, that microscopic mental shift, changes everything. Because when you stop seeking approval and start evaluating whether the other person fits into your life, the frame flips. Suddenly, it's no longer her testing you. It's you testing her. But how does this show up in practice? How do you communicate this frame without sounding arrogant or indifferent? This is where the concept of the phrase that changes the game comes in. It's not a memorized line. It's not a seduction trick. It's an authentic expression of an internal position. Imagine you're talking to a woman and, at some point, she makes a comment testing you. Maybe questioning your choices, your lifestyle, your decisions. Most men immediately go into defense mode. They explain themselves, justify themselves, try to convince her that they are good enough. But what if, instead, you said something completely different? Something that communicated, without aggression, that you're not there to be judged, but to find out if you are compatible? That phrase exists. And when said at the right moment with the right energy, it breaks the automatic evaluation pattern that was taking place. The reason this phrase works has nothing to do with the specific words. It has to do with what it reveals about your mental structure. It communicates that you have boundaries, that you are not desperate, that you have options, that your life is complete without her. And paradoxically, that is exactly what creates real interest. Because here is another uncomfortable truth: no one values what they already fully possess. No one values what is desperate to be accepted. Value lies in scarcity, in selectivity, in the ability to say no. But pay attention, this is not about playing games or manipulating. It's about genuine transformation. The phrase only works when it is the honest expression of who you have become. If you try to use it as a technique, without having done the internal work, it will sound false. And falseness is detected instantly. What we're talking about here is a development process where you stop being the man who needs approval and become the man who offers opportunity. Where you stop asking, "Will she accept me?" and start asking, "Is she compatible with what I've built in my life?" If you're enjoying this content and want to understand how the psychological frame that defines all your interactions works, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And leave in the comments which city or country you're watching this from right now. Let's see how many countries we can reach with this message. In the next few minutes, we're going to dive deeply into the central conflict, why most men fail this initial test without even realizing they're being tested. And more importantly, how you can rewrite this algorithm in her mind using communication that goes beyond words. Let's get straight to the point of what really happens in the first seconds of an interaction. There is an invisible test taking place, and you are failing it repeatedly without even realizing you're being tested. It's not a conscious test. She's not running through a mental checklist. It's something much more primitive, much more automatic. When you enter a conversation seeking approval, your body communicates that before you even open your mouth. Your posture changes. Your tone of voice adjusts. Your eyes look for validation. And all of this is processed by her nervous system in milliseconds. There's no way to fake it. There's no way to hide it. Here is the fatal mistake most men make. They believe they need to build attraction through demonstrations of value. So they start talking about achievements, about what they do, about where they've been, about who they know. Every sentence is an attempt to climb the value scale in her eyes. But each attempt, paradoxically, pushes them further down. Because a truly high-value man doesn't need to demonstrate anything. He simply exists in a state of self-sufficiency that is palpable. He's not trying to impress because his self-esteem doesn't depend on her reaction. And that emotional independence is what truly communicates value. Think about how you act when you're talking to someone whose opinion doesn't matter to you. Maybe a salesperson trying to convince you of something you don't want. You stay calm, indifferent, even a little distant. You don't explain yourself. You don't justify yourself. You simply decide whether or not you want to continue the interaction. That is exactly the mental state that communicates high value. But when you care too much about the outcome, when you need her to like you, all that balance disappears. You become reactive instead of proactive. You respond to her tests trying to pass them, instead of questioning whether her tests are even relevant to you. And here is where the conflict deepens. She's not doing this out of malice. She's not consciously trying to bring you down. She is, instinctively, looking for signs of congruence. She wants to know if you are who you appear to be. If your confidence is real or performative. If your life has structure or if you're desperate for any connection that comes along. The tests come in different forms. Sometimes it's an apparently innocent question about your life. Sometimes it's a comment that challenges your choices. Sometimes it's simply a prolonged silence to see if you'll fill it with nervousness. And most men fail all of these tests because they don't understand what's really being evaluated. You are not being tested on the right answer. You are being tested on your ability not to need a right answer. You are being tested on your ability to remain centered even when the frame is being challenged. You are being tested to see whether you live in her reality or whether she has to adjust to yours. Here's a practical example. She asks, "Why are you single?" Most men go straight into explanation mode. They start justifying, giving reasons, trying to prove there's nothing wrong with them. But the question isn't really about why you're single. It's about how you react to the social pressure behind that question. A man operating from a low-value frame hears that question as an accusation that needs to be defended. A man operating from a high-value frame hears that question as an opportunity to qualify whether she is compatible with his life. The difference isn't in the words of the answer. It's in the energy behind them. And this is where the concept of the phrase that breaks the pattern comes in. It's not about having a clever, memorized response. It's about having a response that comes from a place of genuine non-neediness. A response that communicates, "I'm not here to be approved by you. I'm here to find out if you fit into what I've built." But that response only works if it's true. If you've actually built something in your life. If you truly have standards. If you are genuinely willing to walk alone if compatibility doesn't exist. Because if you're faking this frame while internally desperate for connection, the incongruence will leak out. And incongruence destroys any attempt to establish a value frame. The central conflict, then, is not between you and her. The central conflict is between who you are and who you're trying to appear to be. Between your need for approval and your desire to be chosen for who you really are. Between your neediness and your ability to create healthy boundaries. And the uncomfortable truth is that most men never resolve this internal conflict. They spend their lives trying different techniques, different phrases, different approaches, without ever addressing the root of the problem. The lack of a solid masculine identity that doesn't depend on external validation. Because in the end, the frame you project is not something you create in the interaction. It's something you carry from a structured life, from consistent choices, from respected boundaries, from a healthy relationship with yourself. And when that is present, you don't need to think about what to say. The right words flow naturally from who you've become. Now we arrive at the crucial moment. The turning point where everything changes. You understand the problem. You know you've been playing the wrong game. But how do you rewrite years of conditioning in a single interaction? How do you communicate a completely different frame when your automatic pattern is to seek approval? The answer lies in a shift in perspective so simple it seems impossible. You stop trying to win the game and start questioning whether you even want to play. You stop asking, how do I make her want me? And start asking, do I really want this in my life? And this is where the phrase that changes everything comes into play. But before revealing what it is, you need to understand why it works. Because it's not magic. It's pure psychology. It's pattern interruption. It's expectation inversion. When she tests you, when she questions something about you, when she tries to position you in a lower value category, what's expected is that you defend yourself. That you prove your value. That you try to convince her you're good enough. All modern male social programming pushes you in this direction. Be nice. Be understanding. Don't be too assertive. Don't set boundaries. Accept any behavior. But the high-value man does exactly the opposite. He doesn't defend. He doesn't explain. He simply establishes a different reality with disarming clarity. And he does this through communication that carries three essential elements: confidence without arrogance, boundaries without aggressiveness, and selectivity without contempt. Imagine this scenario. You're talking and she makes a comment that clearly tests you. Something like, you seem like one of those guys who only wants one thing, or why should I believe you're different? Or any variation of that theme. The implicit frame is, prove yourself to me. Most men panic internally and start explaining themselves. But you, operating from a different place, look her in the eyes with genuine calm and say something like, look, I'm not here to convince you of anything. Either we connect naturally or we don't. And it's okay if we don't. It sounds simple. It even sounds passive. But what just happened psychologically is devastating to her pattern. You didn't accept the frame. You didn't enter the game. You established that your presence is not an audition for her approval, but an equal opportunity for both of you to discover compatibility. That phrase, or any authentic variation of it, works because it breaks the categorization algorithm. She mentally put you in a box. Men who need to prove their value. And instead of fighting your way out of that box through arguments, you simply didn't step into it. You operated from a completely different reality. But pay attention, this only works if it's true. If you're genuinely willing to walk away. If you truly have options. If your life really has enough structure that you don't need her validation. Because if you say those words but your body language communicates desperation, the incongruence will destroy any effect. This is where the climax of the internal conflict we discussed happens. Either you've done the work to become a man who truly doesn't need approval, or you're trying to perform something you're not. And the difference between those two realities is the difference between genuine transformation and manipulation that always fails. When you say this phrase from a place of real congruence, something interesting happens in the dynamic. The frame flips. Suddenly, it's no longer you being tested. It's her being evaluated. Not by your words, but by the energetic shift that just occurred. You stepped out of the position of the one who seeks and into the position of the one who chooses. And here is the final paradox most men never understand. This change of position creates more attraction than any attempt to impress. Because attraction is not generated by demonstrations of value. Attraction is generated by the perception of scarcity, of selectivity, of someone who is not available to just anyone. But this isn't a game. It's not a strategy. It's the natural result of a well-built life. When you have purpose, when you have standards, when you respect your own time and energy, you naturally become selective. And that authentic selectivity is felt as genuine confidence. The phrase that changes the game is not a magic line. It's a declaration of emotional independence. It's you saying, without additional words, that your self-worth is not up for negotiation. That you are not seeking completeness through another person. That you are offering partnership, not neediness. And when this message is communicated with clarity, when there's no hidden agenda, when there's no manipulation trying to force an outcome, something powerful happens. You become interesting not because of what you do, but because of what you don't do. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't bend yourself to be accepted. You simply exist in a state of self-sufficiency that is magnetic because it's rare. So rare that when she encounters it, the entire categorization algorithm has to be recalibrated. And in that recalibration, you stop being just another man trying to win her over and become someone she wants to win over. This is the moment of the climax. When the frame established in the first seconds is completely destroyed and rebuilt. Not through arguments. Not through proof. But through a posture that communicates something very simple: I am fine with myself, with or without you. So here we are. You understood the real game. You saw how the initial frame defines everything. You learned that the attempt to prove value is exactly what communicates a lack of it. And you discovered that there is a form of communication that breaks the automatic pattern of categorization. But what do you do with all of this now? The truth is that this phrase, this positioning, is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning. Because what we're really talking about here is not about attracting women. It's about building a man who doesn't need to attract. It's about developing a masculine identity so solid that external validation becomes irrelevant. Many will hear this and think, great, now I have a new technique. But if you're thinking that way, you completely missed the point. Techniques are for men who want shortcuts. Transformation is for men who want lasting results. And the difference between the two is the difference between temporary manipulation and permanent change. The phrase only works because it's the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it is a structured life. There are consistent choices. There is a man who defined his values and lives according to them. There is someone who built something bigger than the approval of any individual person. And when that is present, the right words flow naturally. But what if you're not there yet? What if you recognize that you're still operating from a place of need? Here's the good news: recognizing that is already the first step. Most men go their entire lives without ever realizing they're playing from a position of weakness. You just woke up to the real game. Now the work begins. The work is not memorizing phrases. The work is building a life where you genuinely don't need approval. And that starts with honest questions. What are you building? What are your standards? What are you not willing to accept? Where are you selling yourself for crumbs of attention? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose the truth. Maybe you'll realize you spent years shaping yourself to be accepted. Maybe you'll discover you don't have real boundaries because you're afraid of being alone. Maybe you'll recognize that your life has no clear purpose beyond finding someone to validate you. And if that's the case, you have a choice. You can keep chasing techniques and tricks that give you temporary wins. Or you can do the hard work of becoming the kind of man who doesn't need tricks. The kind of man who naturally attracts because he lives according to principles, not according to approval. This path is not easy. It means saying no when it's more comfortable to say yes. It means setting boundaries when it's easier to be flexible. It means walking alone when everyone is telling you to conform. It means building something that matters more than being accepted. But when you do this, something extraordinary happens. You stop fearing rejection because rejection stops being a threat to your identity. You stop chasing approval because your self-worth comes from within. You stop negotiating your values because you understand that men without standards have nothing to offer. And in this process, you discover that the phrase that changes the game no longer needs to be thought about. It simply becomes who you are. You don't need to remember not to seek approval because you genuinely don't seek it. You don't need to fake independence because you built real independence. This is the resolution. Not a technique. A transformation. Not a shortcut. A path. Not a performance. An identity. And here is the powerful moral lesson that ties everything together. You will never be respected for who you pretend to be. You will only be respected for who you really are. And if who you really are is not good enough for yourself, how do you expect it to be good enough for someone else? The frame you establish in the first minutes of any interaction is not something you create there. It's something you carry from all the moments before, when you chose to respect yourself. From every time you said no when it was easier to say yes. From every occasion when you set a boundary, even at the risk of being alone. So the real question is not, what phrase should I say? The real question is, what kind of man do I need to become for that phrase to be my truth? And when you answer that question with actions, not words, everything changes. Women stop being the goal and become the result. Approval stops being necessary and becomes irrelevant. The fear of rejection disappears because you built something no one can reject, your own self-respect. If you made it this far, you have a decision to make. You can close this and continue as you were, now with one more piece of information you won't apply. Or you can honestly look at your life and begin the real work of building a man who doesn't need external validation. If you choose the second path, leave in the comments what you're going to change first in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video so more men can find this message. Say where you're watching from, what city or country, and what this content stirred in you. Because in the end, real transformation happens when you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing. And that choice begins now.